What happens when late-night television stops being comedy and turns into a battleground of ideology? What if the guest seated under the lights refuses to play along with the host's script? The stage was dressed for laughs, but by the time the cameras cut, the only thing left was tension thick enough to slice with a blade. And Charlie Kirk? He wasn't laughing. The night began like any other episode of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Studio lights beamed, cue cards were stacked, and the house band riffed with practiced ease. The audience, an expectant sea of Colbert loyalists, buzzed with anticipation. The guest? Charlie Kirk, conservative firebrand and founder of Turning Point USA. An unusual choice for Colbert's progressive-leaning crowd, but that's what made the booking electric. From the wings, Charlie adjusted his collar, glancing once at the blinking red light of the live recording sign. His assistant whispered, "Stick to the talking points." But Charlie didn't need reminders. He knew exactly what he came here to say. Colbert, ever the charismatic puppeteer of his late-night domain, strode on stage with his signature confidence. He cracked jokes about politicians, hinted at cultural controversies, and teased the audience about a special guest who might challenge their assumptions. Applause echoed like thunder as he delivered the setup. Tonight's guest believes free speech is under attack. Let's find out what he's really fighting for. The crowd laughed, half in irony, half in curiosity, but behind the curtain, Kirk's jaw tightened. He wasn't here to be mocked. As the band shifted to its guest cue, the lights dimmed, the music swelled, and the trap was sprung. Charlie Kirk stepped into the lion's den, unaware just how far this night would spiral. Charlie Kirk walked onto the stage with a firm stride and an unreadable grin. The audience clapped, some out of politeness, others with a trace of mockery embedded in their cheer. Colbert extended his hand with a rehearsed warmth, and Charlie took it, giving a professional nod. The air between them wasn't cold, but it wasn't friendly either. It was measured, tightly wound. They each knew what the other represented. On one side, institutional comedy with a progressive edge. On the other, a young political figure who had made a career out of defying institutions altogether. Colbert began with safe banter. He asked Charlie about his flight, cracked a light joke about the airport being less controversial than Twitter, and the crowd chuckled on cue. Charlie played along, answering with dry humor and tact. But beneath that exterior was tension coiled tight. He knew this wasn't going to be a platform, it was going to be a performance, one that Colbert had been directing for years. And somewhere in those cue cards, Kirk knew there was a trap waiting for him. The question was when and how deep the cut would be. Then it came, a pivot so subtle it could almost be missed. "You've said college campuses are hostile to free speech," Colbert began, his tone syrupy with curiosity. "But isn't free speech supposed to go both ways?" Kirk leaned back slightly, his smile thin. "That's right, Stephen. But when one side gets deplatformed and the other gets standing ovations, it's not a dialogue, it's a monologue." The audience's laughter wavered. Colbert tilted his head, sensing an opportunity. The first seed of conflict had been planted. The crowd didn't yet know it, but this was no ordinary interview. This was a duel with punchlines instead of pistols, and neither man planned to miss. The conversation drifted toward familiar Colbert terrain, politics disguised as wit. He launched into a bit about right-wing snowflakes, melting under the heat of diversity, his voice laced with irony. The audience howled. Charlie's smile remained, but his eyes hardened. It wasn't the first time he'd heard the label, but hearing it from across the table, followed by an approving roar, was different. This wasn't just late-night comedy. It was a carefully engineered power play masked as entertainment. Colbert leaned in, pressing the advantage. "You talk about safe spaces like they're a threat, Charlie. But isn't Turning Point just a safe space for young conservatives?" It was a punch wrapped in a question mark, and the crowd erupted again, emboldened by the host's smirk. Kirk nodded slowly, resting his hands calmly on the desk. "It's only a safe space when the wrong people feel safe, right?" he replied, his tone colder now. "If your ideology dominates every institution, what exactly are you afraid of?" For a brief moment, the laughter stalled. The joke had been returned, not as humor, but as challenge. Colbert blinked, then reached for a new card. But the temperature had shifted. Kirk's restraint was fraying, and Colbert, sensing it, sharpened his lines further. It must be exhausting defending people who think books are dangerous and drag shows are national threats. That was it. The needle. Kirk's smile dropped. You want to have a serious discussion about what harms children, or do you just want applause? The audience murmured. Something in the air had changed, like static before a storm. And backstage, one of the producers mouthed to a stagehand, "Here we go." The next question didn't come from the cue cards, it came from Colbert's gut. He leaned forward, voice smooth but edged with condescension. Charlie, you've been accused of promoting Christian nationalism. I mean, you're not trying to turn America into a church, are you? The audience laughed nervously, unsure whether it was a joke or a genuine jab. Kirk's jaw stiffened. That wasn't just a question. It was a branding attempt, one designed to corner him in front of millions. Charlie's reply was measured, but fire lived behind his words. I believe in a country rooted in values, truth, family, liberty. If that scares people, maybe the problem isn't my beliefs. He paused. It's theirs. That landed. Some clapped, others booed. The crowd was beginning to fracture. Colbert raised an eyebrow. But whose values, Charlie? Yours? God's? Or just the ones that agree with your party line? The line was clever, sharp, and scripted to provoke. Charlie didn't flinch. It's funny how tolerance always ends where faith begins, huh? He said, voice icy. The room tensed again. The laughs had thinned to silence. Backstage, a producer glanced at the control monitor. We're off script, he whispered. Colbert wasn't smiling anymore. He was squinting, calculating. Charlie had stopped being a guest and started becoming a problem. He wasn't folding. He wasn't performing. And most dangerously, he wasn't afraid. Colbert tapped his pen against the desk, tapping into that dry, trademark sarcasm. So, just to be clear, you don't want a theocracy. You just want America to look more like your church bulletin? The audience laughed, but Charlie leaned forward now, closer to the camera. No, Stephen. I want America to stop mocking faith just to get cheap laughs, starting with this table. The tension sharpened as Kirk's voice lowered, but his resolve stiffened. You don't get to redefine my faith to make it easier to mock, he said flatly, eyes locked onto Colbert's. You don't get to twist belief into extremism just because it doesn't fit your narrative. The studio was dead silent now, the only sound the faint hum of overhead lights. Colbert's smile faltered, not fully gone, but no longer confident. He was expecting defensiveness. Instead, he got defiance. Colbert folded his hands. I'm not mocking belief, Charlie. I'm mocking the weaponization of it. He paused. Big difference. Charlie didn't blink. Then stop using your show to frame people of faith as backward, dangerous, or fake. The delivery was calm, but the impact rippled through the studio like a shockwave. A few quiet claps came from the rear. One audience member audibly scoffed. The illusion of harmony was shattered. They weren't watching a comedy show anymore. They were watching a confrontation, real, raw, unscripted. Backstage, a floor assistant turned to a producer. Should we cue commercial? The producer shook his head. Not yet. This is gold. On stage, Colbert tried to shift gears. You don't think it's dangerous to mix religion and politics? Charlie didn't take the bait. Everything is political to you until it challenges your worldview. Then it becomes dangerous. His words weren't loud, but they were heavy. They landed not as argument, but as indictment. Colbert's fingers tapped his mug. He looked down at the desk for a half-second too long. It was the kind of silence that says more than any punchline could. And just like that, Charlie Kirk had changed the tone of the entire room, and he wasn't done yet. The crowd had been Colbert's armor, loyal, primed, and eager to laugh. But now their reaction had turned. What began as uproarious support for the host's jabs slowly dissolved into awkward chuckles and quiet tension. Some clapped reflexively, others glanced around nervously. A few sat stone-faced. Charlie Kirk wasn't playing the fool, and the studio's atmosphere shifted from comedy to conflict. Colbert sensed it. His next joke about the Ten Commandments being outdated bullet points landed with a thud. The pause afterward was long enough to expose a wound. Charlie seized it. If your only defense is sarcasm, maybe it's time to admit you don't have an argument, he said. That one hit. Even the camera crew stiffened. A boom operator whispered, "He's turning the room." Charlie wasn't just surviving, he was gaining ground. And Colbert, who built his career turning smugness into applause, suddenly looked like a man standing on cracked ice. From backstage, a junior writer leaned toward a producer. "Should we pivot?" The producer shook his head again, eyes locked on the monitor. This is what we wanted. Viral, but the split was growing clearer. A section of the audience clapped when Charlie spoke. Others booed, one person shouting, "Get off the stage!" The chaos wasn't loud, it was fragmented, controlled. And that made it more dangerous. Charlie remained calm, straightening his jacket, eyes never leaving Colbert. "You don't have to agree with me," he said plainly, "but you might want to ask yourself why mocking belief gets more applause than understanding it." Colbert tried to interject, but the audience's confusion had already taken root, and Charlie Kirk had just drawn a line down the center of the room. As the lights dimmed for the scheduled commercial break, the tension backstage erupted into motion. Producers gathered near the edge of the stage, whispering, gesturing, arguing in hushed but frantic tones. "Cut his next segment," one snapped. "No, let it play. This is lightning," another insisted. A stagehand adjusted Charlie's mic, but his hands trembled slightly. This wasn't a routine interview anymore. It was a live-fire political minefield, and everyone behind the scenes knew it could implode on air at any second. Colbert stepped off stage, jaw tight, his smile discarded like a mask tossed in a dressing room. He leaned into his head writer. "I'm not losing my own show to this guy." The writer glanced at the cue cards and shook his head. "You wanted a clash? You've got one." Meanwhile, Charlie remained seated, eyes scanning the audience, seemingly unfazed. His assistant approached with a bottle of water, whispering, "They're rattled. Stay sharp." Charlie nodded once, calm but calculating. He was reading the room like a general scans a battlefield. Over by the lighting rig, a technician murmured, "They're not going to keep this in the broadcast, right?" A producer overheard and answered flatly, "If it trends, they will." The crew's laughter was dry, nervous. Tension crackled through the wires and monitors. In the control booth, the director's voice echoed over the intercom. "Back in 30. Everyone brace." On stage, the band resumed with a smooth jazz riff, but even that sounded forced, like a saxophone playing at a funeral. When the cameras flicked back on, the audience was quieter. Something had changed. The show hadn't just shifted tone, it had cracked open. And neither Colbert nor Kirk was backing down. The lights came up, but the mood stayed dim. Colbert returned with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome back," he said, voice clipped. "Still with us?" The audience responded with scattered applause. Charlie Kirk sat with his hands folded, composed, almost defiant in his stillness. Colbert cleared his throat, flipping through cue cards. "Let's talk about cancel culture," he said. "You claim it's silencing people, but isn't it just consequences?" The trap was baited again. Charlie tilted his head. "No, Stephen. Consequences follow actions. Cancel culture punishes thoughts, opinions, the wrong joke, the wrong post, the wrong guest on your show." A few audience members groaned. Others clapped. The room was no longer an echo chamber. It was a coliseum. Colbert leaned in. "And what about people you disagree with, Charlie? You've never pushed for boycotts? Never tried to deplatform someone?" Charlie smiled faintly. "I push for accountability, not erasure. There's a difference even if your audience can't see it." Gasps. A few laughs. It was fire wrapped in velvet. Backstage, the control booth was abuzz. "Keep rolling," someone said. "He's torching the format." The writers huddled over emergency punchlines, but none felt right. Colbert was losing rhythm, and Charlie knew it. "You say truth matters," Kirk added, "but only when it agrees with your crowd. Otherwise, it's bigotry, misinformation, or extremism." Colbert blinked. "Or maybe it's just wrong," he shot back. Kirk didn't hesitate. "Or maybe you just don't like who's saying it." The audience tensed, polarized, and restless. And in that moment, everyone watching could feel it. This wasn't just a segment, it was a war for the mic. Charlie leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. "You want to talk about free speech?" he asked. "Let's talk about the things we're not allowed to talk about, like Hunter Biden's laptop." The crowd stirred immediately. Some groaned, others straightened in their seats. Colbert's face froze, his fingers tightening around his mug. "Careful, Charlie," he said with a half smile. "This isn't primetime cable." Charlie didn't flinch. Exactly. Because on those networks, people still get to ask questions without being labeled a conspiracy theorist. The temperature dropped. "Oh, come on," Colbert said, waving a hand. "We're not going to rehash a story debunked by actual journalists." Charlie raised an eyebrow. Debunked or just inconvenient? His voice was calm, but the punch was clear. We've seen media platforms suppress stories to protect one side of the aisle. And when that's normalized, the term free press becomes meaningless. The crowd booed. Others clapped. A chant started and fizzled. The studio was slipping into chaos, not loud, but unstable. And Colbert looked rattled for the first time all night. Backstage, a producer swore under his breath. "This is spiraling," he muttered. Another responded, and a blowing up online already. On Twitter, clips were being clipped. Sound bites sliced midstream, and Charlie knew it. He was a step ahead now, using the live show's platform to push a narrative unfiltered. "If this table's only good for jokes," Kirk said, gesturing toward Colbert's desk, "then maybe real conversation doesn't belong on your show anymore." Colbert didn't respond. Not immediately. He looked at his cards, his crew, the audience, then back at the man who had just hijacked his platform. The next words would decide everything. The tension finally snapped like a cable under pressure. Colbert leaned back, then suddenly forward, his smile gone, voice sharp. "This isn't Fox News, Charlie. You don't get to come on here and peddle half-baked talking points like it's gospel." The crowd roared, some in support, some just relieved something had broken the silence. But Kirk didn't blink. He folded his hands calmly, nodded once, and said, "Exactly." That's why it's so jarring when someone tells the truth. Colbert's nostrils flared. He grabbed a cue card and slapped it down on the desk. "This is my show, not a soapbox for political paranoia." Charlie's voice remained steady. "And yet you invited me. If you didn't want pushback, you should have brought on someone who'd smile and nod while you trashed them." A ripple of gasps and scattered applause moved through the audience. The script had fully disintegrated. Colbert had tried to control the segment. Now he was just trying to survive it. Backstage, an assistant director leaned into her headset. "We need to wrap this now." But the control room hesitated. Ratings were climbing, real-time reactions pouring in across social media. On set, Colbert pointed a finger, not accusing, but shaky. "I bring people on to have conversations, not stage political stunts." Charlie raised an eyebrow. "Then why does every guest you disagree with get ambushed instead of interviewed?" That line landed like a fist on the desk. It was no longer banter. It was a breakdown. And Stephen Colbert had just realized he'd lost control of the very circus he built. A silence fell that felt louder than anything that came before. Colbert's face was locked in a grin that no longer reached his eyes. The kind of smile that says, "We've gone too far, but keeps going anyway." Charlie sat upright, still as stone. "What's the point of inviting dissent?" he asked calmly. "If your only response is ridicule and a forced commercial break when it stops being funny." The crowd didn't know how to react. Some clapped, others booed. One person shouted, "Let him speak," and was immediately drowned out by scattered hisses. Colbert exhaled sharply. "This isn't about silencing anyone," he snapped. "It's about standards. This show isn't a town hall, it's comedy." Charlie didn't move. "Then stop pretending it's journalism," he said. That landed with precision. A few audience members stood, not cheering, not jeering, just leaving. The room, once unified in applause, had fractured. Colbert looked around, scanning for support that wasn't there. He had turned a provocation into a purge, and the audience was now responding with discomfort instead of loyalty. Backstage, the mood was chaos. A production assistant whispered, "We lost them. We lost the room." The producer, hands clasped, didn't blink. This is already going viral. Let it burn. On stage, Charlie's expression didn't change. You invited me here to create a spectacle, Stephen. I just didn't expect you'd be the one lighting the fuse. Colbert said nothing. His hand hovered near the cue card pile, but he didn't pick one up. The cameras kept rolling. The invisible line had been crossed, and both men knew there was no walking it back now. The control booth lit up like a war room. Producers paced, fingers jabbing at headsets, debating whether to cut to black or let the mayhem unfold. One leaned into the intercom. Do not move security unless Colbert says so. But eyes were already on the two men at center stage. Two figures locked in a silent standoff, words having given way to a deeper battle. Not of politics anymore, but of power. Colbert tapped his pen. Charlie didn't flinch. A stagehand crept closer to the edge of the curtain, waiting for a sign. But there was none, just murmurs from the crowd and the rustle of cue cards that Colbert no longer bothered to read. You're not going to turn this show into a circus, he finally muttered. Too late, Charlie said, without blinking. You did that the moment you invited me and thought you could control the outcome. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a punch. It was a statement. And that made it worse. One producer whispered to another, if security moves too fast, it looks like we're censoring him. If they don't move at all, Colbert looks weak. The decision hung in limbo. On stage, Charlie crossed his arms, his posture unyielding. The audience was murmuring now, no longer entertained, but enthralled. Something irreversible had happened. The moment wasn't just off script, it was off the rails. And somewhere a red light above the main camera blinked steadily, capturing every second of a breakdown no one could edit in time. Colbert leaned back, his fingers gripping the desk so tightly his knuckles went pale. I think we're done here, he said, voice thin, eyes darting toward the wings. But Kirk didn't move. He simply stared, unblinking. No, he replied, quiet but firm. We're not done. Not until your audience hears what they weren't supposed to. That was the moment a floor producer gave the signal. Two security guards at the side of the set shifted forward slowly, cautiously. The audience gasped, their murmurs rising into full-blown discomfort. One of the guards hesitated near the edge of the stage. Colbert caught the movement, raised a hand to pause it, then looked back at Charlie. This is a comedy show, he said, half apology, half threat. Not a soapbox. Charlie stood, calm, no flinch, no panic. Then maybe stop pretending you're America's conscience, he said. His tone was clinical, surgical. Because if your version of truth can't survive one guest who thinks differently, it was never truth to begin with. A ripple moved through the crowd, part gasp, part cheer, part stunned silence. The guards didn't touch him. They didn't have to. Charlie turned toward the audience, nodded once, and walked off the stage. No escort, no shouting, no spectacle. Just silence that followed him like a shadow. Colbert stayed seated, eyes lowered, lips tight. The band didn't play. No applause sign flashed. There was nothing to cue the crowd, only raw confusion and the sound of a talk show imploding in real time. The studio wasn't just shaken, it was stripped bare. The cameras kept rolling. For once, no one yelled, "Cut." The crew stood frozen behind the lenses, unsure whether to film or flee. Stephen Colbert remained at his desk, fingers still drumming, face flushed and unmoving. Then, in a tone barely above a whisper but picked up by every mic in the room, he muttered, "That's the last time I let a propagandist on this stage." It wasn't for the audience, it was for the record. And it was caught in crystal clear sound. Some of the audience applauded reflexively, others stayed seated, stunned. But the damage was done. The moment, unplanned and unscripted, had become permanent. Charlie Kirk had already exited through the side curtain, but his presence lingered like smoke after a fire. The silence was not just awkward, it was damning. The studio wasn't recovering, not that night. In the control room, a tech quietly flagged the final 30 seconds for backup archival. "This one's gonna leak," he said. The producer didn't object. She knew. There was no walking this one back. On stage, Colbert finally stood, straightened his jacket, and forced a grin. "Well, that was different," he said to the audience, trying to reset the mood. But no laughter came. No music played. Just the faint hiss of live microphones and the realization that nothing about tonight would be remembered as entertainment. Backstage, the energy was radioactive. Crew members whispered behind clipboards, avoiding eye contact with Colbert as he returned to the green room, his jaw clenched and tie loosened. A showrunner slammed her headset onto the table. "He let it get away from him," she muttered. "We're not a debate stage. We're supposed to control the tone." But the tone had been hijacked, and not by accident. Charlie Kirk had walked into enemy territory and left behind a crater. The audience funneled out slowly, pockets of debate erupting among strangers. "That was insane," one woman said. "He actually made some good points," another replied. One couple argued in the aisle, splitting on whether Colbert had gone too far or not far enough. Nobody left laughing. Nobody left untouched. Whatever boundaries once existed between comedy and confrontation had been obliterated, and the crowd was reeling. By midnight, social media had exploded. Hashtags like #Colbert Meltdown and #Charlie Kirk Unfiltered trended across platforms. Clips surfaced within the hour, grainy phone footage from the balcony, backstage audio from a rogue mic, wide-angle shots from the network feed. The episode hadn't aired yet, but the raw footage was already writing its own story. And neither Colbert nor his team could control it now. The broadcast may have ended, but the chaos was only beginning. Within hours, the internet had become a war zone. Clips of the confrontation between Charlie Kirk and Stephen Colbert were spliced, looped, and captioned faster than the network could issue a statement. On one side, conservative commentators hailed it as a victory. Charlie exposed the smug hypocrisy of late-night elitism. On the other, Colbert's defenders claimed he showed restraint in the face of provocation. But no one denied the obvious. The segment had detonated across every platform. Memes flooded Twitter and Instagram. Side-by-side screenshots showed Colbert's clenched expression versus Kirk's unbothered stare. Headlines raced to frame the narrative. Colbert loses control, Kirk hijacks late night, the death of civil discourse on TV. The official Late Show account posted a vague statement. "We aim to foster open conversation. Last night's segment was unexpected." It didn't help. The replies were ruthless. Screenshots, quotes, even a trending petition demanding Colbert apologize or resign. Meanwhile, Charlie Kirk capitalized. He posted the full segment, uncut, to his own channels, tagging it, "They tried to silence me, you decide." Within 6 hours, it had over 2 million views. Donations spiked, followers multiplied. Whether viewers agreed or not, they were watching, and that, more than anything, was what shook the media world. The clash hadn't just gone viral, it had become a symbol, and symbols have staying power. By morning, the spin machines were in full gear. Legacy outlets scrambled to publish op-eds, each claiming to decode the moment. The New York Times called it a reckless ambush that eroded trust in late night as civil discourse. The Daily Wire called it a long overdue exposure of media arrogance. CNN hosted a roundtable. Fox News ran it on a loop. The line between journalism and performance had collapsed, if it even existed anymore. Politicians chimed in. Some Democrats condemned Colbert for platforming Kirk at all. "Why give a microphone to a provocateur?" one congresswoman asked. Meanwhile, Republicans hailed Kirk's composure. "He stood alone in the lion's den and didn't flinch," tweeted a prominent senator. Even presidential candidates were asked about the interview at press briefings. The answers varied, but the implication was clear. It wasn't just a late-night segment. It was a cultural battlefield. Inside CBS, the internal memo was terse. Review guest screening protocols immediately. Staff were divided. Some feared it marked the end of creative freedom. Others saw it as a lesson in hubris. And Stephen Colbert? He skipped that night's monologue altogether, letting a pre-recorded segment run instead. Off camera, he remained silent. But silence, in moments like these, is just another kind of headline. In the days that followed, the noise didn't fade. It evolved. What started as a viral clip turned into a national conversation. What is the role of late-night television in a fractured America? Is it comedy? Is it commentary? Or has it become something more combative, something less honest? The Colbert-Kirk clash laid bare an uncomfortable truth. The illusion of dialogue is useless when both sides are speaking to different worlds. For Charlie Kirk, the fallout was a boost. He doubled down on his media appearances, framing himself as the man who walked into the lion's den and left unscathed. For Stephen Colbert, the questions cut deeper. Was it a lapse in control or a revelation of intent? And for the audience, those who cheered, those who booed, those who left the studio in stunned silence, it was a glimpse into what happens when entertainment collides with conviction. So, what do you think? Was Charlie Kirk justified in standing his ground? Or did Stephen Colbert just ask the wrong question? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that subscribe button, and tell me who you want covered next.